flight attendant refuses to serve black woman, not knowing she's auditing the airline. A heavy hush blankets the airplane cabin as an elegant black woman settles into her seat, her gaze drifting calmly across the aisle. No one around her realizes that she carries more power than her modest demeanor reveals. She is auditing this very airline for its service practices. A potent undercurrent of drama stirs when a particular flight attendant, quick to judge, chooses to deny her even the most basic courtesy. Watch how the smallest gestures, an untouched tray of food, or the refusal to pour a cup of coffee spark a chain reaction that could shake the entire airline to its core. Mamia Wilkerson, an external auditor contracted by the Federal Aviation Service and sometimes by major airlines themselves, sat in her dimly lit home office, reviewing the final details of her upcoming flight. She had done this countless times before, but the tension in the air felt especially thick tonight. Maybe it was because she'd received an anonymous tip about the airline's subpar customer service. Perhaps it was the hint of personal risk that came with traveling under a secret identity. Whatever it was, Mamia had a feeling that something significant was on the horizon. She flipped through the airline's policy manuals, internal memos, and public statements. Her eyes lingered on the glossy photographs of flight attendants beaming at passengers, each image bathed in cheerful, corporate-approved lighting. She knew better than to take these snapshots at face value. In her line of work, Mamia had uncovered stories of racism and classism that would never make it to the polished pages of an airline brochure. She shut the binder and inhaled deeply. If the rumors were true, she would witness poor treatment on her flight the next day. If they weren't, she'd just have a quiet trip. But her instincts told her it would be anything but quiet. Outside, the night was calm. The glow of a streetlight against her suburban house flickered, casting faint shadows across her desk. Mamia's phone buzzed a text from her agency's main contact, reminding her to keep a low profile. As always, she typed in response, punctuating the message with a subtle smile. Despite her many successful investigations, the heavy responsibility to remain objective and invisible never truly left her shoulders. She shut off her phone, stood, and decided to pack just a few essentials for her trip: an overnight bag, her documents, and a mind sharpened by years of exposure to corporate subterfuge. The morning sun shimmered on the tarmac as Mamia arrived at the airport. Dressed simply in a pair of well-fitted slacks and a neat blazer, she aimed to project an air of professionalism without drawing unnecessary attention. Her hair was swept into a low bun at the base of her neck, and her eyes glimmered with quiet determination. She joined the queue at check-in. The airline's logo flashed overhead on a giant screen, sky-blue arcs that formed the silhouette of a soaring bird. Mamia watched the staff behind the counter. Some were polite, smiling at travelers, while others appeared visibly stressed. Airports had a unique energy, a swirling blend of excitement and tension. She found her place in it as easily as she always did, calm, observing every detail. Her turn came. The airline representative, a friendly young man in his early 20s, greeted her with a bright good morning. Mamia smiled. "Good morning. I'd like to check in for flight 472 to Los Angeles, please." He typed rapidly on his keyboard. Everything went smoothly, not a single hitch. He returned her passport and boarding pass with a courteous nod. If she hadn't been on an official assignment, Mamia would have simply thanked him and walked on. But as an auditor, part of her job was to note interactions from start to finish. So far, so good. Security was another matter. Mamia found herself behind a family with 2 small children. They were exhausted from an earlier flight, the kids whining for snacks, and the parents anxious to make sure they made their connecting flight on time. Mamia saw how the TSA lines slowed as more travelers poured into the terminal. The father, exasperated, asked a security officer if there was a faster queue or special lane they could use. The officer curtly told him to wait his turn. Mamiya made a mental note. The harshness was more an airport security issue than the airlines. Still, small observations could paint a larger picture. After clearing security, she headed to her departure gate, where half the seats were already filled. She found an empty seat by a large window overlooking the bustling airport, planes landing and taking off in the distance. A gentle voice from the overhead speakers announced that her flight would begin boarding in approximately 30 minutes. Mamiya took this time to glance around. She saw flight attendants at the gate's desk, calmly scanning their tablet screens and confirming last-minute upgrades. Another cluster of attendants stood in a corner, joking around and sipping coffee. She recognized one of the attendants from pictures she had seen in the airline's internal staff recognition bulletins. Melinda Rowe, awarded for maintaining a calm demeanor under stress. Tall, thin, with a sharp jawline and bright, searching eyes, Melinda had the sort of presence that could either be reassuring or intimidating, depending on the situation. Mamiya watched her interactions from afar. For the moment, everything seemed fine. Melinda graciously assisted an elderly couple with their wheelchair request. Mamiya couldn't help but wonder if this kindness was consistent or just front-stage behavior. When the boarding call finally came, Mamiya waited patiently. She was assigned to seat 14C, near the front of the economy cabin, but she avoided taking advantage of early boarding privileges that might draw attention. She wanted to see how every passenger, from first to last, was treated. Inside the plane, Mamiya found her seat and carefully placed her carry-on in the overhead bin. The cabin was modern, with sleek blue and grey seats, each equipped with small entertainment screens. The air smelled faintly of coffee and cleaning fluid. A line of people shuffled slowly through the aisle, bumping elbows as they hoisted luggage into overhead compartments. Mamiya fastened her seatbelt and watched, half expecting a flight attendant to walk by with a friendly greeting. Across the aisle, in seat 14D, was an older gentleman in a crisp suit. His posture screamed frequent flyer. He nodded politely at Mamiya, who reciprocated with a smile. Over the next few minutes, more passengers settled in. At the front of the economy cabin, Mamiya noticed Melinda and another attendant named Mark assisting families with seat assignments. Melinda's tone seemed a bit cooler now, devoid of the earlier warmth she'd shown at the gate. Mark, a man in his mid-40s with a kind face, attempted to manage a mother who needed to stow a stroller. Mamiya leaned back and closed her eyes, thinking about the tip she had received about discriminatory service. She wondered if it involved not just flight attendants, but possibly the entire crew. After everyone was seated, Melinda and Mark started moving through the aisle, checking seatbelts and overhead bins. When Melinda reached Mamiya's row, Mamiya smiled at her politely. Melinda looked at her, barely nodded, and then moved on without a word. Mamiya felt a slight sting of annoyance, but brushed it off. It was hardly unusual for flight attendants to be focused on their tasks. Then came the safety demonstration. Mark took the front of the cabin, demonstrating how to fasten seatbelts, use oxygen masks, and locate emergency exits. Mamiya had seen this demonstration countless times, but she still watched intently, her auditor's senses dialed to high alert. Across from her, the older gentleman in the suit scrolled on his phone, ignoring the demonstration. Melinda walked by and whispered a reminder for him to pay attention. Mamiya sensed the tension in Melinda's voice but couldn't place its origin. The plane taxied to the runway and took off smoothly. Mamiya gazed out the window. Although her seat was on the aisle, she leaned slightly to catch the fleeting view of the ground as it fell away. She took a deep breath to steady herself for the hours ahead. The flight was scheduled for around 5 hours, enough time for the flight crew's attitudes to surface, for better or for worse. Once the seatbelt sign was turned off, Mamiya pulled out her laptop and began typing notes. She kept them inconspicuous, labeling them as though they were work documents. She wrote about the general boarding process, the flight attendant's demeanor, and any subtle remarks she had overheard. So far, she hadn't encountered anything explicitly discriminatory or rude. Still, Mamiya remained vigilant. About an hour into the flight, the beverage service began. Melinda and Mark wheeled the service cart down the aisle. Cups clinked against the metal tray as Mark poured drinks for passengers, while Melinda retrieved snacks or extra napkins. The two of them made small talk with a few customers, mostly those who looked chatty. When the cart reached Mamiya's row, Mark handed the gentleman in 14D a can of seltzer and a bag of peanuts. Then he turned to Mamiya. "Good afternoon, ma'am. Would you like something to drink?" "Just water, thank you," Mamiya replied softly, smiling. Melinda glanced at Mamiya and said nothing, focusing instead on reading the label on a juice can. Mark grabbed a plastic cup, filled it with water from a pitcher, and handed it to Mamiya. Mamiya thanked him, and he responded with a polite nod before moving on to the next row. Melinda, in contrast, didn't even make eye contact. Mamiya jotted that down in her notes, though it could simply be that Melinda was preoccupied or tired. Mamiya recognized the possibility of something more. She had witnessed plenty of microaggressions in her career. While she sipped her water, Mamiya noticed Melinda's behavior toward other passengers was more affable, especially when interacting with individuals who looked affluent or who were traveling with children. She wondered if it was mere coincidence or something else. Experience told her such biases often ran deeper than outward politeness. Time crept by. The cabin lights dimmed slightly, and Mark came around with headphones and magazines for those interested in renting the in-flight entertainment. Mamiya declined politely. She preferred to observe rather than distract herself. She had to be ready for any sign of discriminatory behavior. When Melinda next passed down the aisle, Mamiya asked if she could have a blanket. The cabin had grown chilly, and Mamiya felt the cool air nibbling at her arms. Melinda paused, her expression impatient. "Blankets are for first-class passengers or those who pay for them," she said curtly. "You can purchase one if you'd like." Mamiya blinked. "Yes, I'm aware. May I purchase a blanket, please?" Melinda exhaled as if Mamiya's question was an inconvenience. "That'll be $10, she said, not offering any kind of courtesy or empathy. Mamiya reached for her wallet and handed over a small bill. Melinda took it, left without a word to fetch the blanket, and returned minutes later. She tossed it onto Mamiya's tray table with so little grace that it nearly slipped onto the floor. Mamiya tried to remain calm, reminding herself to record this in her notes. The older gentleman in 14D gave Mamiya a look that combined sympathy and surprise. Under normal circumstances, Mamiya might have shrugged, but this was exactly the kind of moment she'd been warned might happen. She made another note, labeling it blanket request, borderline rude response. A few seats behind Mamiya, another passenger, a black woman named Tara, with her young son, accidentally spilled a drink during turbulence. Mamiya heard Tara softly ask for napkins. She quickly spotted Mark hurrying over to assist, offering a warm smile and additional napkins to mop up the spilled soda. Melinda, on the other hand, appeared to pretend not to notice as she fussed with the overhead bins. While Mamiya watched Mark reassure the mother, Melinda's eyes seemed to settle icily on Mamiya's row. Mamiya realized the flight attendant was scanning the cabin, but she couldn't tell if Melinda was looking for trouble or simply double-checking seat belts. Perhaps Mamiya was overthinking it. She took a deep breath and returned to her notes, typing softly on her keyboard. Moments later, Mamiya felt a tap on her shoulder. She glanced up. It was Mark again, wearing an apologetic smile. "Everything okay, Mom? I saw you typing on your laptop. Need a charger or anything?" Mamiya shook her head gently. "I'm fine, thank you. Just working on a few documents." He nodded. "All right. Just let us know if you need anything. She returned to her thoughts. Mark was polite and attentive, while Melinda was borderline cold. Could it be just personality differences? Mamia had certainly encountered flight attendants who were less sociable than others. Still, Mamia's instincts told her there was more going on. As the flight entered a patch of turbulence, the seatbelt sign lit up with a soft chime. Passengers quickly buckled up. The plane rattled, overhead bins trembling, but the pilot's calm voice assured everyone that this was normal. Mamia saved her document and shut her laptop, placing it in the seat pocket in front of her for safety. At that moment, a child several rows behind let out a frightened wail. Melinda rushed past Mamia's row, presumably to check on the commotion. Though Mamia couldn't see what happened next, she heard the muffled sounds of a tense exchange. A passenger's voice rose, something about seat placement and needing to hold the child on her lap. Mamia leaned sideways in her seat, straining to catch a glimpse. She saw Melinda gesturing firmly. The passenger, a middle-aged black woman with curly hair, looked distressed as she tried to cradle her crying toddler. Mark hurried to the scene, and Mamia watched him skillfully de-escalate the situation. He crouched down, spoke softly to the mother, and offered a kind smile to the little girl. The tension in the air gradually dissipated. Melinda, arms folded, gave a final glare before stomping back up the aisle. Mamia's stomach tightened. On the surface, Melinda's handling of the situation could be chalked up to stress or fatigue. But Mamia had seen enough in her line of work to recognize patterns, repeated curt behavior towards certain passengers, rarely offering solutions, an aloof or even antagonistic stance. As the turbulence passed, Mamia breathed a sigh of relief. She realized that the friction between Melinda and some of the black passengers on board, herself included, might not be a coincidence. She typed more notes, detailing the tense episode. If she had any lingering doubts about whether the anonymous tip held merit, they were quickly evaporating. It was now mealtime. The flight attendants started the meal service, rolling out trays of hot food and packaging. Mamia wasn't particularly hungry. She seldom found airline food appetizing, but she also knew it was another chance to observe. She decided she would accept the meal if it was offered, just to document how the attendants treated her. As Melinda and Mark approached, Mamia heard them offering choices to passengers: chicken, pasta, vegetarian. When they reached Mamia's row, Mark looked to the man in 14D first. "Sir, would you care for the chicken or vegetarian option today?" "Chicken, please," the man replied, receiving his tray with a grateful nod. Mark then turned to Mamia. "M-A-A-M, how about you?" Melinda, in a brisk tone, interjected, "Oh, it looks like she opted out earlier." The flight attendant shot Mamia a glance that could have been interpreted as either confusion or derision. Mamia's brow furrowed. She hadn't opted out. "I didn't place any meal preference before boarding," she responded calmly. "May I have the vegetarian option, please?" Melinda pursed her lips. "We're likely to run out of vegetarian." She rummaged in the cart with obvious annoyance, then pulled out a vegetarian tray. "Here," she said, practically tossing it onto Mamia's tray table. For a moment, Mamia was speechless. The older gentleman across the aisle gave her a sympathetic shrug. Mark seemed embarrassed, shooting Mamia a quick, apologetic look. Mamia composed herself and thanked them, making a mental note of the exchange. Could it be that Melinda was simply having a bad day, or was she intentionally pushing Mamia's boundaries? When Melinda moved on, Mamia noticed her entire tray was a bit disheveled. The utensils were missing a fork, and the napkin was absent. She gently pressed the call button, hoping someone else, preferably Mark, would attend to her. But Melinda returned. "Yes?" she asked tersely, arms crossed. "I'm missing a fork and a napkin," Mamia said, forcing a polite smile. Melinda sighed as though she'd been asked for something impossible. "I'll check." She walked away and returned half a minute later, handing Mamia a plastic-wrapped fork and a napkin without making eye contact. Mamia's frustration flared, but she reminded herself that she was here to gather evidence, not to engage in a confrontation that would blow her cover. After the meal service wrapped up and the cabin lights dimmed, Mamia took a moment to stretch her legs. She strolled to the lavatory, walking slowly down the aisle. She overheard snippets of passenger conversations, some complaining about flight delays, others excited about reaching their final destination, but she also caught fragments of complaints about Melinda. "Really short with me, practically ignored my requests," said one man in row 18. "She acted like she couldn't even hear me," muttered another voice, a woman's. Mamia lingered near the lavatories, waiting her turn while quietly absorbing these comments. It wasn't conclusive proof of racial bias, but it fed the suspicion that Melinda had a consistent pattern of rudeness, especially directed at certain passengers. One of the voices belonged to a couple, both black, from what Mamia could see. They were discussing how they had asked for an extra cup of water, and Melinda had scowled at them, making them feel unwelcome. Mamia's heart squeezed. Over the years, she had encountered flight attendants who exhibited microaggressive behavior, but rarely had she seen so many complaints on a single flight. The other flight attendants, Mark among them, didn't seem to share Melinda's coldness, which made her stand out even more. Mamia returned to her seat, resolve settling in her chest. She'd have to approach this carefully. If she revealed her identity and confronted Melinda now, the rest of the flight could turn chaotic. It was best to continue observing. She intended to file a comprehensive report once they landed. Eventually, Mamia's curiosity propelled her to speak with Mark directly, though without revealing her role. She pressed the call button. Moments later, Mark came down the aisle. "Can I get you something, ma'am?" he asked in a friendly tone. Mamia lowered her voice. "Yes, actually. Could I speak with you in the galley for a moment, if you're not too busy?" A flicker of concern crossed Mark's face, but he nodded. "Sure. Give me a minute, okay?" Mamia waited until he finished assisting another passenger. Then she followed him quietly to the small galley near the rear of the plane, where they could have a bit of privacy. "What's on your mind?" Mark asked gently. Mamia hesitated, careful with her words. "I noticed some tension on the flight," she began. "I'm not trying to be difficult, but I've observed that some passengers feel they're not receiving fair treatment, specifically from Melinda." Mark's expression clouded with worry. "Listen, I'm not in a position to comment on a colleague's performance, but I can assure you we try to treat all passengers fairly," he said, a hint of defensiveness creeping into his tone. Mamia nodded understandingly. "I appreciate that. I'm sure you do your best. I just wanted to make you aware that it's noticeable." Mark sighed. "Look, Melinda's usually a pro. She's got awards for dealing with tough situations. Today might just be an off day. Everyone has them. It's a demanding job." Mamia offered a polite smile. "I understand. Thank you for listening. And please, don't mention to her that I spoke to you. I just wanted to share my concerns." He agreed and returned to the aisle. Mamia took a few more moments to gather herself, feeling the hum of the engines vibrate through the floor. She had done her due diligence by discreetly informing another crew member. Still, something in Mark's eyes suggested he was aware of Melinda's behavior, perhaps even troubled by it. An hour later, Mamia's phone buzzed with a text message. She had placed it on silent mode to avoid unwanted attention, but the slight vibration alerted her to a development. Carefully, she retrieved it from her purse, making sure not to draw any prying eyes. It was from her contact at the agency we received new info. Some flight attendants might be systematically profiling. Document everything. Be thorough. She swallowed hard. The swirl of a possible scandal grew more concrete. If there was a pattern of discrimination, Mamia's report could lead to serious repercussions for the airline retraining programs, internal investigations, or even lawsuits. She typed a quick response. "Understood," continuing to observe. As Mamia tucked her phone away, she caught Melinda's gaze a few rows ahead. The flight attendant was scanning the cabin, her stare cold and disapproving. It was as if Melinda could sense Mamia was more than just another passenger. Mamia forced herself to remain calm, adjusting her posture and focusing on the seat back in front of her. If Melinda suspected Mamia was an auditor or affiliated with the airline authorities, it could escalate tensions beyond what Mamia could safely manage. With about an hour and a half left in the flight, Mamia felt a slight headache coming on from the cabin's dryness. She pressed the call button for water. Several minutes passed with no response. Eventually, a different attendant walked by the one Mamia hadn't interacted with yet, a young woman named Carla. She agreed to fetch Mamia some water, but needed to check with Melinda, who controlled the cart at the moment. Another 10 minutes passed, and still no water. Mamia gently pressed the call button again. This time, Melinda herself showed up, leaning against the seat with an expression of thinly veiled irritation. "You called?" she asked sharply. Mamia met her eyes. "Yes, I was hoping for some water, please." Carla said she'd check with you. Melinda looked around, possibly aware that other passengers were listening. "We have limited supplies. We can't just hand out water every 5 minutes." A few nearby passengers gasped softly. Mamia inhaled, trying to maintain composure. "I haven't requested anything in over an hour." "Here," Melinda snapped. "Happy now?" Mamia set the cup down on her tray and dabbed at her pants with a tissue. The entire row had gone silent, eyes wide. Clearly, Melinda's hostility was now out in the open. Mamia glanced at the older gentleman in 14D, who mouthed, "Are you okay?" Mamia nodded, tight-lipped. Somewhere behind them, a voice muttered, "That was uncalled for." Another passenger whispered, "You see how she's been acting?" Mamia's heart drummed faster. She'd gathered more than enough evidence to confirm the allegations, but the situation felt tense, even precarious. Not long after, Mamia heard soft murmurs spreading through the cabin. Passengers began complaining to each other about Melinda's rudeness. The tension that had simmered beneath the surface was now boiling over. Tara, the woman who had spilled soda earlier, approached Mamia's row. "Excuse me," she said in a timid voice, "but do you mind if I sit here for a moment? I need to get away from my seat for just a second." The older gentleman in 14D stood up to let Tara into the middle seat, 14E, which was empty. Tara's son remained in their seat, busy with a tablet. She turned to Mamia, eyes brimming with frustration. "Is it just me, or is that attendant being outright nasty to some of us?" Mamia placed a reassuring hand on Tara's forearm. "I've noticed it too," she replied gently, aware that half the cabin was tuning in. "I'm sorry you've had such a hard time. It's not supposed to be like this." Tara exhaled shakily. "I paid a lot for this flight, and she's making me feel like I shouldn't be here." Mamia understood the feeling all too well. "I'm sorry," she repeated, feeling that the words were insufficient. Mark walked by, saw Tara in the seat, and asked if everything was okay. Mamia expected him to usher Tara back to her own seat, but instead he knelt, concern etched into his features. "Is there anything I can do?" he asked. Tara cast her eyes downward. "No offense, but it's your colleague. She's being rude, dismissive, like we're inconveniences just for existing. I don't understand. I apologize on behalf of the crew." He stood, gave Mamia a swift nod, and then walked toward the front of the plane, presumably to have a word with Melinda. Tara left after a few minutes to check on her son, but the solidarity of passenger voices was growing. Mamia overheard remarks from others. "She barely spoke to me except to say no to something. I asked for an extra napkin, and she practically rolled her eyes. I'm going to file a complaint when we land." This was precisely why Mamia was here. The evidence was no longer circumstantial or hearsay. It was unfolding in real time. The cabin lights brightened as the pilot announced the beginning of descent. Mamia felt the usual mix of relief and anxiety. Soon the flight would end, and she'd have to confront the situation more publicly. Every word that Melinda spat or withheld could have far-reaching consequences, not just for her, but for the airline at large. She fastened her seatbelt and powered down her laptop, sliding it into her bag. The older gentleman next to her cleared his throat. "I'm sorry you've had to endure this. I'm not one to interfere, but that wasn't right," he said quietly. Mamia gave him a grateful nod. "Thank you. I appreciate that you noticed." Outside the window, the cityscape of Los Angeles emerged, sprawling highways and tiny cars glimmering under the late afternoon sun. The plane dipped, leveling out for the approach to the runway. Mamia's heart pounded. She was not just a passenger, she was the appointed eyes and ears of a system meant to protect travelers from exactly this kind of discrimination. She was about to land in Los Angeles with a story that would shake the airline's foundation. The landing was smooth. As the plane taxied to the gate, passengers seemed eager to disembark. Tension hung in the air. Mamia collected her belongings, preparing for a confrontation she knew might occur. She glanced up the aisle and saw Mark speaking quietly to Melinda. Melinda's posture was stiff, her expression stony. Whatever Mark had said, it didn't appear to soften her. When the seatbelt sign turned off, passengers stood, stretching and pulling out their luggage from overhead bins. The older gentleman nodded goodbye to Mamia. Tara gave her a small wave, seeming grateful for her presence. Mamia waited, allowing the throng of passengers to thin out, content to exit last. At the front of the plane, Melinda stood with Mark, forcing a tight smile as people passed. Mamia approached with measured steps. Her plan was to remain composed, to exit without dramatics, and then to report the incident to the airline's ground staff. But as soon as Mamia drew near, Melinda's glare was tangible. "Any problems, miss?" Melinda asked, her voice laced with sarcasm. Mamia paused. She could feel Mark's unease radiating. Every instinct told her to remain calm and professional. "I suggest you review your customer service training," Mamia said softly, just loud enough for Melinda and Mark to hear. She continued walking, stepping onto the jet bridge. She could have said more, but she was saving her official revelations for the right place and time. Once inside the bustling terminal, Mamia headed straight for the airline's customer service desk. A small queue had already formed, some of them from the same flight. She recognized Tara and approached her. "You filing a complaint?" Mamia asked gently. Tara nodded, eyes still red from earlier. "Yes, but I doubt they'll do anything." Mamia placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "They will," she said with quiet certainty. Tara gave her a puzzled look. Mamia stepped forward in line. When it was her turn, she requested to speak with a supervisor in a private setting. The agent at the desk, noticing Mamia's serious tone, agreed to fetch a manager. Mamia waited, watching as other passengers lodged complaints, presumably about Melinda. Her presence was calm yet purposeful. A few minutes later, a young supervisor appeared. "Hi, I'm Carolyn," she said, extending a hand. "I hear you wanted a private conversation." Mamia introduced herself using her full name and official credentials as an auditor under contract with the airline and relevant aviation authorities. Carolyn's eyes widened. "Let's step into the lounge," she said, guiding Mamia to a back office near the service desk, separated by a frosted glass door. Once inside, Mamia presented Carolyn with her identification and a letter of authorization, both of which confirmed her role in auditing the airline's customer service. She also handed over a folder containing the notes she had taken during the flight-printed documents she had prepared in advance. Anticipating this moment, Carolyn's face blanched as she skimmed the notes. "I had no idea we'd have an auditor on this flight," she stammered. "Usually these visits are coordinated with the corporate office." Mamia nodded. "That's precisely why it's an undercover audit. We do it to see how the staff behaves during an unannounced inspection." Carolyn studied the folder. "My God, this is extensive." She looked up, swallowing hard. "I see multiple incidents, all involving one particular flight attendant." Mamia drew a calm breath. Her name is Melinda Rowe. These aren't the only instances. Multiple passengers have complained. Carolyn sat back in her chair, fingers tapping nervously on the desk. Melinda is one of our more senior attendants. She's been recognized in the past for excellent service. Mamia raised an eyebrow. Awarded staff are not immune to bad days, nor are they immune to harboring biases, she said gently but firmly. I'll be filing a full report. This is serious. We have evidence of potential racial discrimination. Those complaints from passengers won't be easily dismissed. Carolyn's eyes brimmed with concern. What do you suggest we do immediately? I would start by collecting statements from the affected passengers before they leave. Also, you'll want to notify your higher-ups in the airline's corporate structure. The best step might be to place Miss Rowe on administrative leave pending an investigation. Also, I strongly recommend a review of your training protocols to ensure this doesn't happen again. Carolyn nodded, jotting notes on a notepad. Understood. I'll expedite a formal inquiry. Is there anything else I can do to help? Mamia paused, reflecting on the flight. Ensure that the other flight attendants, like Mark, don't suffer backlash. He actually tried to mitigate the damage. As far as I can tell, the issues predominantly revolve around Melinda's behavior. Carolyn sighed. I'll include that in my report. I'll also contact those passengers who filed complaints. Satisfied with the immediate steps, Mamia left Carolyn's office. She could still hear disgruntled voices at the service desk, presumably other passengers from the flight. Mamia felt a sense of relief. She had done her part to confront the wrongdoing. But her role wasn't over. Her official report would be forwarded to both the airline executives and the Federal Aviation Service. There would be follow-ups, corrective measures, possibly even media inquiries if the story got out. Unbeknownst to Mamia, Melinda had been escorted to the lounge for questioning. She had no idea Mamia was an auditor. Now faced with the gravity of the complaints, Melinda's jaw tightened, her posture rigid. When Carolyn mentioned an undercover auditor had been on her flight, Melinda's face went pale. Who? She demanded, though the answer was already apparent. That woman in 14C? Her voice rose in incredulous anger. She was auditing me the entire time. Carolyn maintained a professional calm. We don't reveal the identities of auditors, Melinda, but you should know there have been multiple complaints, and there's a suggestion that your behavior was racially motivated. Melinda tried to protest. That's absurd. I have no bias. I treat everyone the same. It's just some people are more difficult or don't follow rules. Carolyn shook her head. We'll have to investigate. Until then, we're placing you on leave with pay. I strongly advise you to contact your union representative. Melinda stood up abruptly. I can't believe this, she spat, her face twisting in contempt. I'm an award-winning flight attendant. I'm the victim here of some elaborate scheme. But Carolyn wasn't swayed. It's out of my hands. We have verified complaints, including from the undercover auditor. Please cooperate. That's all I can say. Melinda stormed out, her mind reeling. She replayed her actions on the flight, searching for any justification that would exonerate her. Deep down, perhaps, a kernel of guilt flickered memories of curt words, dismissive gestures, and the stark difference in how she treated some passengers over others. But she wasn't ready to face it yet. Mamia found a quiet corner near a coffee shop in the airport terminal. She ordered a latte, her mind buzzing with the day's events. The cappuccino's warmth soothed her slightly, allowing her a moment to decompress from the tension in the air. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a call from her agency contact. She stepped away to a more secluded area. "Hey," she answered, keeping her voice low. "Hey," came the voice on the other end. "We just got word from the airline's ground team. They confirm your observations. Good job. They'll proceed with a formal investigation." Mamiya breathed out a long exhale. Thanks. It was more intense than I expected. She was antagonistic to multiple passengers, especially black ones. You did the right thing. We'll need your full report by tomorrow morning. We want to finalize everything while it's still fresh. Mamiya nodded, though the contact couldn't see her. I'll send it tonight. Any word on how the airline plans to handle it? We're not sure yet. But this is a serious matter, so expect a thorough follow-up. Also, prepare for a potential interview if they decide to escalate this. Mamiya agreed, thanking her contact before hanging up. She sipped her latte, letting the reality sink in. She had done what she set out to do: uncover bias, collect evidence, and set in motion a process that could bring about change. But her emotions were still tangled. She felt sadness for the passengers who had to endure such poor treatment, frustration that such behavior persisted, and relief that she was able to help. Now, she just needed to finalize her documentation and let the corporate machinery do the rest. Before leaving the airport, Mamiya spotted Tara and her son sitting in a waiting area near baggage claim. She walked over, carefully noticing the tension still etched on Tara's face. "How are you holding up?" Mamiya asked gently. Tara gave a weak smile, a bit shaken. "That was easily the worst treatment I've had on a flight, but I filed a complaint, so hopefully something changes." Mamiya knelt to greet Tara's young son, who clutched a small stuffed dinosaur. "Hi there," she said, smiling. The boy buried his face in Tara's arm. Turning back to Tara, Mamiya decided to reveal just a sliver of her identity, hoping to offer reassurance. "I can't share much, but your complaint isn't going to fall on deaf ears. Trust me, the airline is taking this seriously." Tara's eyebrows rose. "I hope so," she said, curiosity evident in her expression. She seemed to sense Mamiya's words carried weight beyond that of a regular passenger. Another passenger from the flight, a man in a tracksuit, approached them. "Excuse me, I saw you talking on the plane. Did you also deal with that rude attendant?" he asked. Tara nodded, and the man introduced himself as Robert. He had lodged a complaint as well. "I was just trying to ask for some water when the cart came by, and she gave me this look like I was annoying her." Tara sighed. Same story. Mamiya managed a small smile. "You're not alone. I think we'll see changes soon." She couldn't say more, but she hoped her assurance would comfort them. After a few more pleasantries, Mamiya left them, feeling that at least the passengers had each other's support. Mamiya caught a taxi to her hotel near downtown Los Angeles. The sun had begun its lazy descent, bathing the city in a warm glow that glinted off the skyscrapers. She checked into her room, greeted by crisp, white sheets and a minimalist decor. Normally, she'd appreciate the peaceful setting, but her mind was alive with the day's events. She set up her laptop on the small desk, opened a fresh document, and began typing her comprehensive report. She detailed every observation, from the initial subtle slights to the blanket incident, the water cup fiasco, the meal service aggression, and the final meltdown of civility. She included notes about Mark's more professional demeanor and statements from other passengers. She laid out the timeline meticulously so the investigative team could see the pattern of Melinda's behavior. Hours passed, and Mamiya barely paused, fueled by a combination of adrenaline and moral drive. By the time she finished, the city outside had shifted to a tapestry of night lights. Mamiya proofread her report, attached relevant photos she had discreetly snapped, and clicked send. A sense of finality washed over her. She had taken this as far as she could in her capacity. Now, it was up to the airline and regulatory agencies to do their part. The next morning, Mamiya's phone began buzzing early. She received messages confirming that her report had been received and escalated within the airline. A quick glance at her email inbox revealed multiple notifications. A corporate liaison from the airline thanked her for the thorough documentation and apologized for the flight experience. The Federal Aviation Services Compliance Department acknowledged receipt of her report, stating that they would follow up if additional questions arose. Her own agency contact requested a debriefing call. Mamia handled each message systematically. After years in the auditing field, she knew that immediate concern and swift communication often meant real action was imminent. She hoped it wasn't just lip service. Sure enough, by mid-afternoon, Mamia learned that the airline had officially opened an internal inquiry, had begun interviewing passengers who filed complaints, and had placed Melinda on administrative leave pending the investigation. She felt a wave of relief, though she knew that institutional change takes time. Sometimes, an employee's bias is a symptom of a larger organizational problem. Still, it was a start. 3 days later, Mamia was in her agency's Los Angeles office, a modest suite with glass walls and a few potted plants. She was about to join a video conference with the airline's CEO, Martin Fielding, a man she had met only once before at a corporate training event. The screen flickered to life, showing Martin seated in a polished boardroom, accompanied by 2 other executives. "Mamia, thank you for taking the time," he began. "We regret that your experience and that of many other passengers was so negative. This is not who we strive to be as an airline." She nodded. "I appreciate your willingness to address it promptly. I trust you've read my report." Martin cleared his throat, leaning forward. "Yes, it was extensive. We've interviewed multiple passengers who corroborated your findings. Based on the evidence, we've taken disciplinary action against the flight attendant in question. While we cannot disclose full details of our HR processes, I can say that retraining and possibly further measures are on the table." Mamia sensed the corporate tightrope walk he had to balance accountability with careful HR language. "I understand, but please note, this incident highlighted a deeper issue. It wasn't just one passenger's experience. Numerous passengers felt singled out because of their race. That suggests a systemic shortfall in training and oversight." Martin nodded slowly. "We are prepared to roll out additional diversity and inclusion training. We're also revising some of our complaint handling procedures. We want to ensure that any future incidents of discrimination are reported and addressed swiftly." They spoke for another half hour, discussing next steps and Mamia's recommendations. She ended the call feeling cautiously optimistic. It wasn't a complete victory, but it was a meaningful step forward for the airline. She could only hope they followed through on their promises. Later that evening, Mamia dined alone at a small Italian restaurant a few blocks from her hotel. She sipped on a glass of red wine, reflecting on how one hateful or biased interaction could cascade into something transformative. She had seen it in her previous audits: changes to policy, new training modules, sometimes even public apologies that improved airline culture for years to come. Yet Mamia was also aware that bias was a hydra cut off one head, and another could grow in its place. True change would require ongoing vigilance. She had chosen this career for that very reason, to hold corporations accountable and to use her position to protect everyday people. And it was a calling she took seriously. She replayed the flight in her mind, Tara's distressed expression, the older gentleman's empathy, Mark's attempts to mitigate the damage, and Melinda's haughty glare. They were fragments of a tapestry that told a bigger story, one about power, prejudice, and the resilience of those who refuse to accept either as an unchangeable reality. Mamia's assignment wrapped up within a week. She flew back home on a different airline, one she also might audit in the future. This time, the flight was quiet, professional, and blessedly uneventful. She spent her time reading a novel, letting her mind wander from the stress of her last experience. Back at her suburban house, Mamia unpacked her luggage and exhaled the tension she had carried since that morning she departed. She watered her plants, opened the curtains, and let sunlight flood her living room. The mundane tasks felt grounding, a reminder that life's bigger battles are best tempered with moments of peace. Over the following weeks, Mamiya would occasionally receive updates. Mark sent a brief note of thanks, mentioning he'd participated in the airline's internal investigation. Tara emailed Mamiya after discovering her identity through social media speculation about the mystery auditor, thanking her for stepping in and encouraging passengers to speak out. And the airline quietly updated its website with new commitments to passenger well-being and inclusivity, though it didn't mention the specific incident. Mamiya smiled at these small but meaningful signs that her work mattered. She hadn't done it for recognition, she'd done it to ensure that passengers like Tara, or even the older gentleman in 14D, never had to endure disrespect because of who they were. One day, Mamiya's phone buzzed with a short message: "Case closed. Officer's statement, dismissal effective immediately. Thank you for your service. Agency contact." She stared at the screen, registering the finality. The airline had decided to terminate Melinda's employment, apparently concluding that her track record of prejudice and rudeness was severe enough to warrant dismissal. Mamiya felt a mixture of emotions. She believed in second chances and recognized that firing someone rarely addressed the deep-rooted biases that cause such behavior. Yet, accountability was crucial. Perhaps Melinda would reflect, learn, or seek help for whatever prejudices drove her to behave this way, or perhaps she would remain bitter. Either way, Mamiya knew this resolution sent a firm message that discrimination would not be tolerated. As Mamiya closed the last page on this assignment, she knew there would always be another airline, another business, another pocket of society where prejudice lurked. But for now, she allowed herself to savor a sense of accomplishment. She had turned an anonymous tip into a catalyst for change. She had seen the worst of someone's behavior toward innocent passengers. Yet she had also witnessed solidarity and kindness from others who refused to stand by silently. The story didn't end with a grand sweeping finale. Life seldom does. Instead, it concluded with incremental improvements and a strong reminder that vigilance and compassion can dismantle even deeply ingrained bias. Mamiya would keep doing her part, flight after flight, always alert, always ready. And that, dear viewer, is the story of how one determined woman, armed with empathy and official authority, helped to shine a spotlight on prejudice in the skies. Thank you for joining me on this in-depth journey of courage and accountability, where a single flight exposed just how damaging one individual's prejudice can be, but also how powerful a collective response is when people stand up for each other. In a world that sometimes feels divided, moments like this remind us that change is possible when individuals refuse to stay silent. Mamiya's determination to protect everyday travelers serves as a reminder that watching out for each other can make all the difference, whether on a flight or in our local neighborhoods. If you found this story compelling, please hit that like button, share the video with friends or family who believe in fairness and justice, and subscribe to this channel. Your support helps bring more stories to light, stories that hold a mirror to society and inspire us all to be a little kinder, a little braver, and a lot more united.